Welcome, everybody, to part 2 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 76. We're going to be going through the Trump tariffs and what I think you need to know to not fall for narrative. And again, this one's a bit iffy because Trump is a one hard MF to figure out because he pivots all the time. He puts out strategic different ambiguity. Sometimes he goes off on his own. Sometimes he goes with the strategy. So, you don't know. But this one, all I need to do is follow the money of the Trump administration. Then I can do a forecast and you can decide whether this makes sense in terms of what is actually happening right now. So let's go through what's happening right now. There are 3 explanations that came out this week around Trump tariffs. So if you haven't noticed, $5 trillion was wiped off the stock market. All relationships around America and its allies and its enemies are all being renegotiated, and that is causing a ginormous disruption in the previous post-World War II Bretton Woods world order that took all currencies, took them off the gold standard, traded them against the dollar. The dollar then got all of the gold, a massive chunk of the gold through the Federal Reserve System and backed the dollar by gold. And then as the Federal Reserve got the government deeper into debt through war, death, and destruction, through the proof of weapons network, through the IMF system, the World Bank system, and the Bank for International Settlement global networks of central banks, it eventually defaulted on the gold in 71 and went into the final debt-based Ponzi scheme where you can roll over the Ponzi scheme for as long as people, which wipes out middle-class America and confiscates all assets to the wealthy that can borrow at 0% at the expense of everybody else. Now, to reverse that, you need a new world order. I've covered this in many, many different videos. You can go to my new world order videos, you can study further, or we'll go through what it is right now. Essentially, you need a shock to the system because capital in surplus countries like China, which have a state banking system, so it can't be over leveraged, and surplus reserves, and a BRICS network that is connected to investing through Belt and Road Initiative, supporting global South countries to rebuild their countries as they're being bombed through the IMF system, has created a network of de-dollarization. Also, through the petrodollar, and focusing on their own people, the Middle East has been investing in their own infrastructure. China's been investing in its own infrastructure. They have created a population that now have vast reserves, and they're now more significant, and they get board seats in the proof of weapons network like BlackRock. So now they have economic power to dictate the future. America and Europe have just been wiping their middle class and handing over through crony corruption and using debt slavery in order to hand over all the contracts to the proof of weapons network and the mafia, essentially. And they've created a lot of enemies because they've been using covert regime changes and deliberately enslaving countries and pretending it was for democracy. And so that is the state of affairs right now. So Europe and America are just saying, right, the European state, you're a surveillance state. We've already co-opted you. We took away your sovereignty through European Union. We took away your currencies through the European Central Bank. We're just going to go all in, and there ain't shit you can do about it. We're going to wipe out everything. We're going to do covert operations in order to take out, Europe was big Germany. Germany was a manufacturing country. A manufacturing country required Russia's cheap gas. The America and the CIA, the Fed, blew it up. The ECB said, yeah, we're just going to asset strip the Europeans. We're going to buy American gas, which is 70% more expensive or whatever it is. That's going to create a recession in Europe. And then we're going to hand over the war machine through Zelensky and implant CIA that was executing that operation, where America can asset strip the rare earth minerals, and Europeans can be fooled through the USAID BBC sponsored media that said Putin is Hitler, while America, the CIA, and Putin were essentially weakening Europe, taking out the gas, and now Europe is in recession. And now they're saying, we'll print all the money. We'll get you to send it all to the military contractors. Zelensky can get his cut. We can kill more Ukrainians so that America gets its rare earth minerals. And BlackRock owns 50% of the land anyway. And the UK economy has securitized its land against IMF debt. And we can pay off all the corrupt politicians. And Europeans can just be wiped out. And we can see what we can get away with as we launch a CBDC and put them all on a universal basic income based upon divide and conquer strategies and open borders and fooling them into thinking they all hate each other, so we can create civil unrest, and then we can create the surveillance and tell them to all stay in their homes and be happy. America is doing that through stable coins. You've got the beta test. Now, we're told that there's three stories of what is basically happening right now. Either the Trump administration is just incompetent. So the Democrats and the people that are ideologically aligned with the left, they say, Trump is crazy. It's all incompetence. They don't know what they're doing. That's one ideology. The other is that we have hit peak centralization of the proof of weapons network. And there is a strategy for rolling over the debt. The $9 trillion that needs to be rolled over in America, if you can force the Fed to reduce rates by crashing the economy, and then you can create an environment that gets the 10-year rates down, then you can wipe off $1 trillion of debt refinancing, and then hopefully roll over the economy again and wipe out middle class again. Those that own stocks and real estate are happy, but you essentially create this creative destruction and demolition, and then you roll over the Ponzi scheme, because all of the people that own real estate, they're saying, yeah, we don't care about the middle class. Just get my stocks back, my 401k. Please get my stock price up. Please get my real estate price up. If you don't get it up right now, I'm just about to retire, and I was going to buy Bitcoin with it. You can't crash it now. Screw everyone else. Screw them. They all need to be wiped out, but please just get my bit up right now, because I'm enslaved to the system. They're all in debt. There's nothing they can do. You can't crash my stock and help them because it would just be too destructive to the whole thing. And then remember, all dollar is debt. Paying off the debt means you crash the system, and then you enter into chaos. So it pits people against each other, and it brings out the worst in human behavior, all because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. That's why it's a Bitcoin story, because people get to reverse that, as I covered in part one. So that's the second story. And essentially, this is a shift from the post-World War II Bretton Woods system that has hit peak debt. And now we need to create a new world order, because essentially, and we'll cover this more in the macro section, Russia won the war, European got weakened, new power happened in the Middle East, and BRICS is aligned around that new, and the global financial proof of weapons network is invested in all of them. So now let's asset strip America into an AI and robotics data center, as we are doing with China. And then we get to invest in both using the Middle Eastern money and wealth because they actually built an economy based upon resources. And so those are like the different versions, the three different versions. You can take your pick. I'm not quite sure which one it is because it seems to change. But what I do is I dig deep and I follow the money. So let's go into what actually happened this week. So firstly, April the 2nd, 2025 is called by the Trump administration Liberation Day. This is where the narrative has been pushed in a MAGA flag that we're going to bring all our jobs back to America. We recognize that middle class has been shafted by this system. So boomers, you need to suck it up. And somehow we're going to maintain world reserve currency status. And we're going to rebuild. We're going to make the rich richer. And we're going to bring the middle class. And we're going to bring jobs back. And we're just completely going to ignore the reality of Triffin dilemma, which says if you want world reserve currency, you have to have a trade deficit, i.e. what tariffs reverse, and a fiscal deficit, i.e. debt to push dollars out in the world. And therefore, globalism is required because you import goods in order to perpetuate dollars globally. And if you want to reverse that, you have to give up on the world reserve currency. But they're saying, America's saying we can have it all. The Trump administration saying we can have it all, even though it's not possible. So what is the thing anyway? Well, anyway, if you can get as much fiscal debt, which is the old system, and then you can try and get the trade deficit into a surplus and thread that needle, they believe that you can save the debt-based Ponzi scheme and recapitulate the debt-based Ponzi scheme and save the boomers that have all the real estate and assets. And if you can do this impossible mission, there's no choice anyway, because everything was headed to World War III based upon the proof of weapons network. So now Trump is here to deliver that message, and Trump and his cronies are sucking out and asset stripping just in case it goes wrong, and saying, have some Bitcoin, and we're going to build a crypto stablecoin side. We're going to try and keep it so we get the Bitcoin, but please, you get some Bitcoin and protect yourself. The ones that don't get Bitcoin in this whole damn thing are going to be the ones on the wrong side, unless Trump is 5G, 6G, 12G, Tress, genius, samurai, ninja, and the administration can thread this impossible mission and recorrect the stock market to the exact right level where rates go here and the Fed does this and then global capital does this and they can make America great again and it rebuilds its capitalization base. And now Apple can manufacture iPhones in America and they cost 10 times as much because they're made by Americans and all the components are made in America because they want a booming economy, get everyone's wages up, and think they can tackle inflation at the same time as getting oil prices down and think that their oil drill baby drill companies aren't going to go bankrupt. So apparently the 16,000 D chess that the Trump administration has is going to be able to solve that. If they do it, I will give all the credit where it's due. Remember what I said when I said vote Trump. Get the Bitcoin strategy, protect yourself, but knows that here's all the problems. Don't listen to what he says, follow the money. Anyway, so we got the announcement of Liberation Day on the 2nd of April. He says all the right things to get everyone saying, great, I'm going to get my job back. And he's arguing essentially a logical argument that the tariffs are not fair. Everyone's been ripping us off, even though it was the strategy of the world reserve currency and the debt-based Ponzi scheme. We're reversing that. Okay, fine. All right, so we're reversing that, which means that we need to weaken the dollar and give up world reserve currency and capital outflows into other regions. Can't tell you that part of the story, just telling you that we're going to keep the dollar strong and we're going to do this. So apparently this strategy is to bring back industry, which is a good thing. America needs to recognize where it is in the global power game of capital right now. And that brings back the jobs into America so it can focus on its own people. It can weaken the dollar. The proof of weapons network gets dismantled. People stop lending to the US government. They then lend and invest in their own infrastructure because their currencies are strengthening relative to the dollar. And they start spending that back into America. And then America has a trade surplus. Basically, he's fighting what he claims are called unfair duties imposed by, others on U.S. goods. And so that is the narrative that's being shared. Trump, in effect, in executing this, as I said, has blown up the global trading system that has stood for basically more than 75 years of the proof of weapons network that was negotiated at Bretton Woods. Most people know it for the financial system. Bretton Woods also set up protecting all the borders, protecting all the ports, and dollar dominance by backing it by gold. They defaulted, as I said, in 71 with the Nixon shock. But by doing this, it is saying we are entering a new world order. But Americans are meant to believe that we're entering a new world order and we're still going to dominate the world as the global hegemon. One has to give. You either continue the system and end up in a civil war and communism and a surveillance state because of the wealth inequality through the structure of the dollar, or you reverse the system, you do a stablecoin standard, Bitcoin standard, you use tariffs and you shrink the economy and recognize that other powers are the powers, and you focus and double down on AI, and hopefully Americans follow the asset strippers that are essentially trying to get their last part of the dollar to buy Bitcoin, and everyone follows that, and we enter into capital outflows. Or you start with the first and then think you're going to thread the needle and reverse back to the debt-based Ponzi scheme. Whatever happens, you need to protect yourself. All roads lead to protecting yourself with Bitcoin. So the idea of this day, April the 2nd, is that there is a new 10% baseline tariff on all imports from every country, even those that impose lower rates upon the US. And so this is a new revenue stream. And this new revenue stream comes in. And if you want to avoid it, then you can take your factory, build it in America, and employ Americans. And then hopefully that creates wealth. And if it creates wealth, then the fact that your iPhone now costs $5,000 rather than $1,000 because it's made in America, hopefully there's enough wealth distribution because it brought back the jobs, and America can be insulated, and it increases the wealth while at the same time correcting the stock markets, correcting capital markets. Or it's a psyop because they're just going to reverse it and get the Fed to reverse it and try and just renegotiate in the short term, which I feel like that's what they're doing. Anyway, so the announcement said that they're going to charge half of what they are charging the US. So if Cambodia has 70%, then the reciprocal tariffs is going to be 35%. Firstly, where did that chart come from? Where did those numbers come from? Most people recognize that these were crazy numbers that didn't bear effect on reality. But anyway, those were the numbers that created the corrective event. The numbers were, try and figure out how those numbers came. But anyway, the numbers are there, and now everyone moves to a negotiation friendly. The market crashes. The Fed needs to decide what to do. All of the world needs to decide what to do. And the market is so uncertain, but we get the change. This is what Trump was here for, change. So, for example, European Union are going to be charged, they basically get 39% tariffs. China gets 54% tariffs. In general, from the research that I've done, and it's a complex calculation, but in general, US tariffs have always been lower than those of other countries because they got the world reserve currency and they created the debt-based Ponzi scheme and they perpetuated dollars globally in order to be able to fund and create the proof of weapons network and create global terrorism in order to wipe out and kill 300 million people through wars, death, and destruction because the mafia runs the CIA and the money is printed to extract wealth from the middle class, as I've always said. But according to the World Trade Organization, I tried to look up the real numbers, and the World Trade Organization says the average US tariff, and they said it's weighed for goods actually traded, is 2.2%. That's the average. In comparison with the EU, the average is 2.7%. And with China, apparently, is 3%. And in India, it's more like 12%. And so that's what the World Trade Organization says. You do the study if you're interested in that. But now this is levied upon 60 different countries as well. So 60 different countries are impacted. China got 54%, as I said. Cambodia got 49%. They're saying this is half, so they're saying that they charge 100%. Remember, if you've read Operation Gladio, that remember all of these drug trafficking organizations and the addiction of America, addiction on heroin was created by the CIA, and they had to destroy these countries in order to get those routes and those drug trafficking routes to prop up the dollar. And they did it through the Vatican Bank. And the Vatican Bank was the money laundering organization. The CIA was Nazis, mafia, Italian mob, Jewish mob Read the book, Operation Gladio. This is all fact. This is all true. And they created sex trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking in order to create violence in the Middle East. Israel was created as a jurisdiction. Again, not talking about the people, not talking about the religion. I'm talking about the intelligence that created it. And then you co-opt these organizations that have resources. You plunder their resources through violence, through mob death and destruction. And then you create slave labor. That created the transatlantic slave trade across America and Europe and Britain. Then you put these people in ghettos. You get them addicted to drugs. And that is all imported through the CIA in order to, and then you create all of these wars. You get them to fight the wars. And then they come back with PTSD. You make them homeless. You get them addicted to drugs. That's how that's how this system, it's a mafia system. That's how it treats its own people, let alone all the people that it was, the 300 million people that died outside of the network, including its own people. And then you end up with these tariff wars, IMF, and all of the things I've covered on the proof of weapons network. That's why Cambodia has to charge at. And Trump says, oh, no, they treat us unfairly. Anyway, you do the math. Laos, who was part of that original operation, 48% tariffs. Vietnam, part of that drug trafficking operation that created the proof of weapons network through Operation Gladio, they now have to pay 46%. They got split into Operation Gladio, communism versus capitalism, split the country in two. 10 years Vietnamese War, wiped out $7 trillion from the average American and European to fight those wars, all for the profits of the military-industrial complex. Sri Lanka, they pay 44%. Thailand, 36%. All of these organizations were part of the Proof of Weapons Network. Taiwan, 32%. They were a US first island in order to create those semiconductor chips. But the narrative that you're fed in MAGA is that, no, they're treating us really badly. South Africa, 30%. I mean, the resources, 800 years of terrorism across Africa in order to exploit all of its resources, and still exploiting them today, funding M23 in Congo, using the Rwandan government, backing it while you're pretending you're sanctioning it so that it can steal Congo's resources. Rwanda's the largest exporter of rare earth minerals to the Proof of Weapons Network, even though it doesn't have those rare earth minerals, all funded by creating all these militia groups, funded Western interests like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda. We've covered this many times. And then you use those in order to justify the war so that you can take those resources. And then South Africa, we're told, oh, they're so bad, all because they launched an ICC case against Netanyahu for plausible genocide, and he won. And it was actually convicted. India, again, 26%, a rising power by taking sanctions, using Russian gas and oil, and then exporting it to Europe by taking a clip there just to circumvent sanctions. As with all of these countries, the only reason they charge these tariffs is because the CIA that's importing all the drugs and getting Americans addicted to, all the drugs in America, they're using these different jurisdictions in order to get the resources from Afghanistan and China and the poppy seeds, refactor them through the Mexican drug cartels that are actually institutionally part of the CIA and the banksters that are laundering all of this money through. All part of it. We're led to believe that this is about coming after them, despite the fact that the government is only layer 3. Layer 1 is the central bank. Layer 2 is intelligence. Intelligence protect corporate interests for the mafia organization that props up the Proof of Weapons Network. And then the IMF is the economic hitmen that create all of this death and destruction and basically institutionalize and securitize the sex trade, the drug trafficking trade, the arms trade, and use sanctions as financial weapons of mass destruction and currency warfare through plants like George Soros, who's the currency guy that uses hedge funds by borrowing at 0% from the central bank. Anyway, it's gaslighting when you know the truth. Follow the money. It's so much easier to understand the world. Then you don't get fooled. narrative control. India 26%, Japan 24%. I mean, Japan, the Japanese central bank is an organization that lends out trillions because it was essentially co-opted by the Fed system, the ECB system, or later the ECB. And you get free money that causes inflation to the everyday Japanese people. So that funds can borrow money at 0% and then create that Japanese carry trade and basically create a financial weapon of mass destruction anytime you want to do whatever with the economy. European Union, which was always, as I said, about taking away sovereignty from the European countries, 20% tariffs. Philippines, which is a vassal state after all the crimes against humanity that the Americans did in Philippines, and all of the raping and sex trafficking and everything that happened through these proof of weapons network. Philippines, which now has a military base in order to get the military industrial complex profits as it moves away from the Middle East into the Asia Pacific region and the European region. They now have to pay 17%. And the reciprocal tariffs, of course, will not go to specific goods such as copper, pharmaceuticals, cars, semiconductor chips, lumber, gold, energy, basically certain minerals that are not available in the United States. Basically, according to the White House, they won't be charged. Why? Because they are all required by those that paid for the Trump administration campaign in the first place. That's what the technocrats need. They need the minerals for the batteries that are required for the Teslas so that the Teslas can provide the data for artificial intelligence that is needed because Elon Musk, on behalf of the globalists that has got capital invested in all regions, can just say MAGA, MAGA, make America great again, while it asset strips everyday Americans. Protect yourself. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong, but follow the money and it tells you the truth. Do not listen to what they say. These were implanted by the same CIA outfit. How do you think Elon got all the technology that the military industrial complex created? And then the NSA is used in order to get that data back into intelligence. What deal do you think that was? Do you think he runs all these companies? Anyway. So now countries are then coming back and they're retaliating as we speak. Some will cave in and capitulate because they got no power. Almost others will say, no, we're going to hold strong. Some of them are going to get the Bank of England, like Carney, to run their country and use their power of the proof of weapons network to try and get some negotiation leverage so that Canada can be asset stripped under the guise of pretending to fight against MAGA or Trump. And so you got all those narratives going around, and we're all meant to get behind them. But anyway, this week, almost $5 trillion was wiped off from the US stock market. Could be closer to $7 trillion by the time we're done on the Liberation Day announcement. So the rest of the world then says, we need to not have dependency upon the American economy. We need to hedge. What does that do? That's what creating the global world order is changing, shrinking America into a regional power and forming allegiances around BRICS, Middle East, and the other superpower surplus nations. So China, Japan, and South Korea, they announced that they're going to be agreeing in order to promote regional trade with each other. India comes out and then starts considering easing its trade and investment restrictions that were imposed between China. So BRICS align again, even though they share a border and they were enemies before. Now they start to say, right, let's get rid of all that. Let's do our trade together. Chinese electric vehicle giants like BYD, then it starts to saying that it's going to be considering investing $10 billion into creating a new factory and manufacturing plant for within India. The Canadian Prime Minister, now run by Mark Carney, who's campaigning to be he's the interim, and now he's campaigning the ex-Bank of England governor. He said that the era of close relations with the United States is over. Could be posturing, could be part of the proof of weapons network. Most of these leaders are just part of the same game as well, because capital has decided. Capital has decided where money's going, where the surpluses go. Trump is telling everyone that it will help lower taxes. So this is meant to be met with a tax reform and lower taxes for the everyday American to offset some of these effects. So we shall see if the strategy is that. He then comes out and says, well, this is just a tactic for you to negotiate. He said in one speech that, for example, if China wants to negotiate, he can give us TikTok. If he gives us TikToks, then we'll consider reducing tariffs on China, the largest economy in the world, the superpower. Just give me TikTok, and then we can control the narrative, and we can put that into the NSA, and we can do our Israel first strategy. Because remember, Israel, the leadership came out and said, we don't have a youth problem, we have a TikTok problem. Because too many of them are finding out the truth of what I call the proof of weapons network. And one of those vital construct is the violence of, the weaponization of Holocaust and that narrative in order to create violence in the Middle East as well. Trump says that he hopes the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, is going to cut interest rates. So that battle between that strategic tension that I talk about, the Fed can blame Trump administration. The Trump administration can blame the Fed. You get carnage. You create that carnage. And that's the strategic tension that's needed in order to manufacture consent for this stablecoin standard. You can then say, well, the reality is we're in debt. We've got $9 trillion to refinance. We need to do that at a lower rate. Now we've got the 10-year treasury down. We can do that at a lower rate. That saves us trillions. And we can then thread the needle and rebalance the economy and go back into growth all of a sudden. And hopefully confidence doesn't go, even though the agendas that are asset stripping the economy are all invested in the hedge. So they're invested. They're going to be fine no matter what, which is why you need to look after yourself. So what is really happening here? I believe, again, following the money, this is a bit speculative, but I believe that he's doing what he's paid to do. So what do I always do? I don't believe politicians. I believe every politician, despite whether you think that they're, coming after the deep state or not. I believe to get into a position of power, you need money, then you're blackmailed, you're lobbied, and then if you get in a position of power and you don't do as you say, you're assassinated anyway. So nobody is above the system, no matter who you think. Could be 12D chess. I'll be the first to admit it if the 12D chess plays out in any way. But I don't think it is, from following the money and everything that I'm seeing. So what is he being paid to do? Well, what do central banks want right now? Well, gold price is going to all-time highs because they're buying gold. So central banks is hedging for a change in world order. The Fed, the SEC, BlackRock, they got all their buddies into Bitcoin. They did the operation Choke Point 2.0. They launched the Bitcoin ETF. They got all of the TradFi financial institutions into Bitcoin, and now they're handing out an item of deregulation so that they can all get the Bitcoin financial services. Elon, what is he doing? He's the technocrat. He's saying, I am right-wing now. I used to care about climate change. Now I care about right-wing things. I care about MAGA. But what is he doing? He's getting the AI, robotics, and the stablecoin system all set up and collaborated, saying, Trump, please go to Greenland and get me these rare earth minerals for batteries, and I will give the NSA and the Proof of Weapons Network all the data from the cars so that we can then create this stablecoin social credit score. So he's the number one backer. He's creating that region, the AI technocrat. Who is the second largest backer of the Trump campaign? It is the Mellon family. The Mellon family, they're globalists. So you've got Elon, a globalist, invested in all regions. You got the Mellon family. And by the way, they don't just fund campaigns for love of country. They fund campaigns to get returns. is ROI, is pragmatism, is simple ROI, is prostitution. I'll pay you this, you get me this. Elon, this is what you get. Melon, what do you get? Well, the Melon is plugged into the proof of weapons network. They know that there's a recollaboration of the New World Order, and the New World Order says there's power in the Middle East, there's power in the BRICS bloc. Europe is being sacrificed for CBDC beta testing. And America's going to become an AI data center, and China's going to be competing in the AI race, building robotics as well. They're invested in it all. So global capital flows are saying we need blocks. What is block saying? It's saying, please move all of the money, the military money, away from the Middle East, over to Europe, and over to Asia Pacific. So the military industrial complex can get its next bit of attention. Please also create a stable BRICS and a stable Middle East so that we can invest into those regions with any capital outflows. So the Mellon family is saying, shrink America into regional power, support blocks, and Trump, you can benefit from the Bitcoin strategy, the stablecoin strategy, and you can have strategic investments in all these regions, and you get to thread the needle and see what you can do. But whichever way it goes will be okay. So even if Trump knows it or not, that's his boss. Who was the third largest of capital? The Adelson family. The Adelson family are the Zionist part of the faction, the Israel first part of the faction, making sure that Trump is doing what AIPAC says, making sure that all of the AIPAC and different factions have the Israel first strategy within Senate and Congress. And they have a different plan. Their plan is that they know that the GCC is the power in the region, the Gulf Cooperation countries, you know, the Saudis, the Emiratis, they have too much power. They're looking to normalize with Iran before October the 7th. So that is a faction of disruption. We need America to go into war. Now, they want to do that because if they can get American boots on the ground in the Middle East, then they know that they can do a PSYOP like they did before in the 67 war, USS Liberty, or like they did with 9/11, where you radicalize Americans to fight Iraq and Iran, basically funding both sides of that for the profits of the military industrial complex and clean break memo and everything that came. So the Adelson is saying, allow us to do whatever we want in the Middle East, and give us as much power as you can, strategically escalate, because we know we've got to negotiate with the real powers, which is the GCC. And although there are some factions of radicalized Masonic Zionism, you can have that, but capital says it's more profitable now. We don't need the Israel strategy of creating all that war in the Middle East. Now there is so much capital, let's stabilize the region. There's more profits in that, which is why if you look at the military contracts, they're exiting the Middle East, they're moving to cybersecurity and AI, and they're going to Europe and Asia Pacific. So that's where you get the strategic tension. I'll cover more about that, how that's happening in the geopolitical section. So the three strategies, the three backers, the three people that said, here's hundreds, millions, you need to deliver that for me. What is Trump's job? Trump is to do that. And that's everything that he's doing. He's creating the technocracy. He's carving up the dollar for the stable coins. He's creating the AI ecosystem. He's shrinking America into a regional power, which is the Mellon family. And he is doing strategic escalations in the Middle East via Israel proxy in order to strengthen their negotiation power. Now, he's not putting boots on the ground because he may know that Israel can use that as a psyop to actually get in a war in the East, which would be the fall of America, because Iran has agreements with China and Russia and the BRICS layer, and that is just World War III, economic destruction for everybody. Nobody profits from that, and it becomes pragmatic. So Zionism is no longer useful in that map of the world, and so they're trying to hold on to that narrative, and Trump has to deliver that. So he's strategically allowing them to do what they want. knowing that the GCC has the power, is my belief. That's what capital says. Now, even whether Trump's doing that or not, money can be used in order to say, do this, that is your job. Now, your job, Trump, is to get a narrative to make that acceptable to Americans. And your job, Europe, is to just do it and see what you can get away with, because we don't have sovereign states in Europe anymore. So the European banks are now calling the Fed in this crisis since tariffs and trying to get Citibank bailed out. Citibank, a shareholder in the Federal Reserve, because they're now forcing the Europe is now speaking with the Fed saying reduce rates. It worked. They don't have enough dollars. By being too big to fail, they can force the Fed's hand because they're optimizing for their shareholders, the banks, not American people. Now, in his speech, he tells you that he's doing this dual mandate to maximize price stability and employment. Anyway, the banks and the European banks, they want the rates to be cut. They want easing. They want to print more. They want to get as much money and give it to the military industrial complex. Switzerland is, they're currently they're in trouble. They've got a negative two-year yield as a result of this. That would drive Switzerland into recession. That's the home of the Bank for International Settlements. So global capital uses its influence to change Fed policy. BlackRock, what are they doing? They're negotiating all of the ports. What was Bretton Woods? Bretton Woods was America controlling the ports. BlackRock is saying, we'll buy all these ports. America, or Trump, is saying, we need this for the national security of America. No, you need that to give the profits to BlackRock. Those ports pay billions of dollars in fees. Tariffs, 10% tariffs. Who benefits from that? The ports that support what BlackRock want. So now you're getting all of these strategic negotiations where regional power means control of ports. BlackRock profits from that. BlackRock is global capital. So it is being done. Now, what's happening with the port in Panama? The narrative is fed to America. We need it for national security. The CIA benefits. You get to use it in order to control certain policy. China gets upset. China said, well, we invested in the Belt and Road Initiative. We were supporting Panama. We were allowing them to have the profits because we want them to buy our product. We want them to buy our cheap cars. And they were getting electric vehicles all across Panama. Now BlackRock says, no, we can't do that. We get the contracts over to Elon. Panama, you need expensive ones from Elon. So China then blocks the deal that is being done negotiating all these ports with BlackRock. And how does it do it? Because it's got investors from Hong Kong and says, the Hong Kong owner, you're no longer allowed to sign off on this deal. So it is safeguarding public interest. What is this? This is an exact example of the difference between the China and America model. China's reinvesting in its people and reinvesting in countries to get them to buy products. The proof of weapons network, the dollar-euro system, and the petrodollar system is propping up assets through violence in the Middle East, sacrificing Europeans in order to get regime change, war, death, destruction, and prop up the dollar to get to asset strip Europeans and Americans over to those contractors, which the CIA and the Fed are working for, essentially, the corporate interests. They're all shareholders in each other. And China says, no, you can't do that. BlackRock says, you can do that. We're going to take over the land and the port and the profits from tariffs. And we're asset stripping everyday Americans. They get some more inflation when the Fed gets to pivot the strategy. But at least they get to think that they're winning. I'm sorry they lied to you. When you follow the money, this is the story that is told. If they do different and money tells me otherwise, I'll adjust and I'll say that was absolutely ethical. They're going to shrink the economy. They're going to tackle this, but it's systemic, which is why the proof of weapons network can never strategically retreat. You will always be disappointed unless you have a Bitcoin strategy And that's when you start to understand whether the country is doing it. So do you get the Bitcoins? We covered that in the Bitcoin section. If you get the Bitcoins, you know that they're trying to do something. Do you get the yield on the stable coins? If you do, you know they're trying to do something. If they don't do that, then you know it's all about asset stripping, knowing that the dollar is going through a strategic retreat. So 26 different ports in 26 different countries are all being negotiated between BlackRock and China right now. JD Vance comes along and says, I'm going to go visit Greenland. Who's he visiting Greenland for? For Elon Musk. That's the resources, the rare earths, the batteries that are needed in order to sell more cars. If you can then sell them into Panama and all the other regions around the strategic power. But what narrative do you get? We need them for national security. So he goes and visits Greenland over the last 2 weeks in the name of national security. And if you believe that, I've got an oil field to sell you as well. Because there are vast resources that those that paid for the Trump administration want to exploit. So all they got to do is put the narrative while they asset strip and benefit from it as well. Denmark, who actually is the colonialist that took control of Greenland, they publicly condemn it. And what do? They spend more on the military industrial complex. So it's just a way of negotiating contracts with those euros to prop up the euro dollar, which means if they are going to rebuild their manufacturing base, then that means you need to weaken the dollar. Weakening the dollar means you can't prop up the petrodollar. Does any of it make sense? Well, apparently they've got a plan. I mean, if you can see it, you can see it. Damn complicated. And so Carney's coming along and saying that he's taking Trump's annexation. Seriously, Canadians, strategic tension. You need to believe that we're going to be forced to become the 51st of the United States. The CIA is what lets all that fentanyl through, but we need to blame it on Canada. So then we can spend more money and we get more wealth confiscation in the proof of weapons network. And they start playing their theatrics, just like Zelensky's paying his theatrics. So what do we get at the end of this? Well, today, right up until Bitcoin Hard Talk, the Fed came out and Jerome Powell, the reasonable guy, the GOAT, the head, says, I'm the reasonable balance against Trump all craziness. I won't talk about it. Strategic tension again, the reasonable versus the crazy. And so Jerome Powell came out and said the narrative that he wants to push, which is, it's not working, Trump. We're expecting higher inflation. While Trump is saying, no, we're expecting deflation. We're going to get prices down. So then you get that strategic tension so that Jerome Powell can blame Trump. Trump can blame Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell is saying expect higher inflation and lower growth, stagflation. That's what the head of the Federal Reserve is. He said, I'm not retiring. I'm living out my final 1 year. You don't control me. We're layer 1, you're layer 3. So all of the language in the speech today, anyway, it was focused on inflation, implying what does inflation mean? Implying that if inflation is not under control, then I don't need to cut rates. Now you can create the strategic argument between the Federal Reserve and the Trump administration. So this is pushing that strategic tension that I always talk about. And that's the way you need to do it in order to be able to blame each other. But what is really happening? Well, global capital is saying that you need to be a regional power, which means you need to shrink the economy. That's what global capital is saying. So Fed talks about, how do we do this? Well, he's saying there is a changing immigration policy that creates strategic tension between everybody. There is, between the left and the right. You change fiscal policy all at the same time, massive changes. You create trade policy, massive changes with October the 2nd. And you change regulatory policy all at the same time. What is the end result? Everything that Adelson wanted that the Mellon family wanted and that Elon Musk wanted, which is what they paid for. So what happens next? Well, we need to then decide, what is the Fed going to do? What are the 10-year Treasury? 10 years have gone down, the yield's gone down. That means that it worked in order to restructure the debt and get it cheaper. But at what cost? We will find out. Can they recover the economy? Can they thread the needle? Was that the plan in the first place? Well, the Fed says we're not meeting FOMC, the bunch of banksters that get together every quarter. They're meeting on May the 7th. So then we find out, are they going to cut rates? Are they going to leave hold? Everybody's saying, what is going to happen with markets? And more uncertainty, more uncertainty. More uncertainty means capital outflow, which shrinks the economy, which is what the global world order wanted in the first place. The US cannot be profitable and the world reserve currency at the same time. Remember the walls of money. In a debt-based Ponzi scheme, you have to choose between, if you want the world reserve currency, then you have to have persistent trade and fiscal deficits. If you want to push for free trade and fiscal surpluses, then you have to shrink the money supply and with it, the economy, which is a depression because you're paying down the debt, essentially. That's the fundamental flaw of the Fed's debt-based Ponzi scheme. You can't have both. But Trump's saying we're delivering you both. So maybe they all know something that the economics doesn't know about. And maybe they've got $65,000 D chess. The UK learned this the hard way. By the way, nothing is new. This is what the Bank of England did to England, and this is what drove us into World War I. But you don't need World War Is in modern day warfare because it's more profitable to avoid World War III, which was the old plan. And instead, you block the regions up into blocks. So you just need to protect yourself. Don't rely on the politicians. If the politicians under-promise and over-deliver, great. I'll be the first to admit it, saying, wow, he really was looking out for those middle class. But if not, protect yourself, rely upon yourself. That's what Bitcoin was created for. Trustlessness, no leader, no holy messiah that's going to come back. Just simple maths and code that is now too big with proof of work, that can fight back against the global financiers that are now arranging the global economy and giving people their bit of Bitcoin. Trump is the messenger in order to shrink America to regional power is what I think is going on, and dress it up as make America great again. So that is what I think we are seeing right now. I know it is incredibly complicated, but the TLDR is I follow the money. Trump is doing what he is paid to do. And I think everything that he is saying to you will turn out to not deliver you the result that you originally asked for. And the only way to make it is to do what he is doing, asset strip the dollar, end up with Bitcoin, and follow exactly what he's doing with his money, which is betting against the dollar and betting for Bitcoin, even though that is not what's being said. So I hope you enjoyed that. That's going to do it for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 76, part 2. This week in macro, we've done this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and we're going to now move over to part 3. Part 3 is where we're going to do this week in geopolitics, tie it all together with everything that's actually happening on the war zones right now. And then I'll look at whether my theories about what is actually going to happen by following the money is playing out on the war zones of the proof of weapons network right now. So let me grab some water. While I do that, please do share, please do like, please do retweet, please do subscribe to my channel. Please do sign up for the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Go over to simondixon.com. Get a free digital copy of my book. Get all of the video series back up. Go to Telegram group. All the links are on my thing. Go do some of that. I'm just going to grab some water, and then we're going to go into part 3 this week in geopolitics.